Hello, everyone.
classes with them.
I would think.
Yeah, me too. I was thinking
They've seen me before, so.
You work okay. That's it.
Nice to meet you.
They all know triple.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I only know it as work from home because I started in January. So
I told you when the first time I
I've
went
been
to trip, I was like,
to
Y'all, we're gonna get started pretty soon. So, okay, I think I know where.
it's kind of in North Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Natalie.
Natalie, nice to meet you.
Excellent. Thank you, Shri. Now I hear myself somewhere. Hey, everybody, welcome to, after a long layoff, welcome back to Write the Docs Austin. It's great to have everyone here in person. We've got, I don't know, 12 people maybe here in the room, and some number of participants online, and it's great to have everyone. 20. All right, so we're still building, but it's great to have everyone back and to see you virtually, speak with you virtually. Tonight we have Justin presenting from DevDocs about Docs as code and all the advantages of using Docs as code. We're here at a beautiful facility in East Austin at the HEB and Favor App Tech Center, and it's pretty nice. You have to say, we should do more events here. And even though we're here in the HEB heartland, Shri and Margaret brought all the snacks, so thank you for
That's true.
handling that. Justin, I did not memorize your bio, so I'm just going to read it from my phone.
okay.
Justin's been programming since he was 10 years old when he created his first fan website, didn't we all? For the game Warcraft 2 using JavaScript and HTML. His love for all things technology persisted through a degree in electrical engineering and a career designing and building solutions for tech problems faced by companies he's worked with. And he's going to tell us all about that tonight. So I'll just go ahead and bring Justin up.
Cool.
And welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the intro. Let's see here. Oh, we had an agenda, didn't we? We'll get some feedback. Have to turn off the sounds.
I figured out how to mute Margaret.
I did. Sorry.
So this is like, we've got a small little agenda here. What time is it right now? I want to make sure I stick to it. All right, so we're a little bit early, so stopwatch here just in case. So we already had the announcement intro. So now we're on to the presentation. We did have a small code of conduct. I think this is pretty common sense stuff though. Appreciate that Shri threw that in there. So, nonetheless, we got a couple of links here. So I think this is the last link, so we'll move past that one. But here's some slides and a demo for you guys today. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the advantages and this loads. There we go. That's good. Talk about some of the advantages and drawbacks to Docs as code and kind of what it is, what's the purpose, why you would use it, why maybe you wouldn't use it. Has time for some Q&A. So I'm from a company called DevDocs. If you've heard of a company called DocForce previously, we kind of formed out of that company. There's three of us that formed with Travis. He's here today. Isabella is an early joining member as well, and Catherine at home. She's not here today with us, but basically we started this company to provide technical documentation and software development solutions to companies. And basically we try to focus more on developer documentation as a company. We don't limit ourselves to it, but that's kind of our specialty. And when we also try to provide the tooling and the full solution to make that happen. So whether that's implementing the tools, different things like that, that's kind of what we do. So we're working long-term on a couple of other ideas, but at the moment, that's our focus as a company. So it's something that we do quite a bit when it comes to Docs as code. Is one of our favorite approaches. So here's kind of a quick overview. We'll talk about what is it, what's a high level overview, what is it supposed to look like, what kind of things, like what are the pros and cons, when should you use it, when shouldn't you, what are the challenges. I'll have a little quick mention of how it compares to Data. I'll show you guys a demo of a popular tool called Docusaurus. that you would actually use as a tool set to implement this. And then we'll go on from there into some Q&A. So 1 second, actually, I forgot to bring up my speaker notes during this, so I should probably have that as a presenter view here, but you guys can see my whole screen, can't you?
No.
Sure.
Oh, that's sad. All right,
I
well,
think you just move that over.
what's that?
I think you just move that over to your.
If you stop mirroring, I guess would be the way to do it.
Is that on the sharing?
Wait, no,
content?
but you're. Oh my
Just
God,
drag it
no,
over to
no.
your laptop.
Drive whatever. I'm just totally not following you guys.
You're sharing your screen, right? Your
Yeah.
entire screen? Oh, thanks. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sharing my whole screen. I think,
That extend on.
yeah, I think maybe if there's a way to, hold on, just give me 1 second. I apologize. Good thing we started a little early. But I have notes, and if I don't have my notes, that's gonna not be fun to talk about.
Just leave. Yeah.
Just put them up, everyone can read them.
Just, yeah, there you go. We'll talk about it. You guys can see my prepared spiel as I go,
Okay.
you know, giving it here, so that should be fun to see how it can. All right, I apologize for not being better prepared, y'all. But
All good.
it's our first meetup back, right, in a while, so it wouldn't be a meetup without
None
some.
of us know what we're doing.
Dragging you out of your home into a strange building to do a
Exactly,
presentation is
exactly.
very unnerving. I feel the same way.
All right, you know what? I can get it up on my phone with the speaker notes, so we'll
There you
make
go.
this a modern technology. We'll make it happen, everybody. Give me 1 second here. In the meantime, you can look at the my fun memes that I had to put in here, and you guys can laugh at this one, hopefully.
Already hard.
That's what I was looking for.
The spoon fork has graduated to being called a spork these days.
I know.
He prefers the formal.
True. The writer and
Yeah.
Well, apparently I can't do it from here either, so that's super fun in general. Oh, wait, maybe I can. See how it works. Well, nonetheless, we'll wing it a little bit, and I'll have to do it from memory, so we'll see how it goes. Basically, the gist of it is that technical writers are asked to do a lot of different things and be a lot of different roles that we've seen, at least in our line of work. Which when we take on projects, we have, you know, all sorts of things that people need to do. You have all of these things here, right? You need to be concerned about how it comes across from marketing. There's marketing people, there's product people. Depending on the type of documentation you're writing, you may need to kind of jazz it up in different ways. You know, sometimes it's like, hey, let's document this thing, but actually we want to sell it to our customers at the same time. So now you got to be a little bit of a marketing writer. You need to, you know, support customers. You need to support sales. You need to support all sorts of different people. So I think technical writing is well positioned. We used to talk about this a lot, that technical writing is actually like a good kind of in if you're trying to like work with companies, because it touches so many different departments in a lot of ways that you can really, you know, get to the heart of a company through technical writing. And so I think a lot of times technical writers are pulled in a lot of different directions, you know, learning new tools, learning new processes, having to understand technical things that you're not a developer. You got to understand what developers are doing. You have to understand how the users are thinking, and you have a lot on your mind a lot of different times when you're doing technical writing. And so I think, you know, Docs as code is another approach that writers are being asked to learn, I think. And so because of that, we want to make it, the whole point of Docs as code is really about allowing technical writers and developers to kind of work better together. And the main thing behind it is that we want to have technical writers can sometimes be on the outside of what the writing or what the developers are doing. So developers have their own processes, they have their own things that they want to do, they have their own way of going about getting their code to production. They have all these different methods that have been created, and they're pretty, you know, successful in a lot of ways to get that done. Things like continuous integration and deployment, testing pipelines, all these different things like that. And so for Docs as code, the idea really is to get closer to where the developers are doing their work and keeping the content closer to that, such that whenever it's time for the writers to pick it up and actually do something with it, it's not so far away where it's kind of this over the fence thing where you're maybe throwing PDFs at each other and having them review that or other kinds of crazy stuff like that. Now, if you're newer to technical writing, maybe you're already doing Docs as code and your company is, already having some, a developer product, for instance, that you guys are working on. And so this isn't necessarily as foreign to you of a concept, but if you've been in technical writing for a while, I think this is a little bit more new in terms of like these pipelines, especially because in the software development world, a lot of these things weren't really commonplace until more recently. So again, some of the reasons why you would want to do it is basically you want to have the content live close to the code, and you want the content to be developed in a very similar way to the way that code is developed and managed. So this is a high level view of kind of what it looks like. And this is also a high level view of how code is developed most of the time nowadays. So you generally have somewhere where you keep your source content. Usually it's in markdown files, and that's the kind of go-to style that most people use. This was popularized because of the rise of GitHub in a lot of ways. And you'll notice in a lot of open source software, you'll see when you go to a GitHub repo, the first thing you see is a README of some sort. That's usually written in Markdown, and that usually is your introduction to that particular piece of software. So for developers, that README is pretty invaluable if you want to use whatever that software is and you want to incorporate that open source software. So this approach has been very popularized by open source community in general. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, you can see the flow. You start off with a source control, usually in Git. You can use something like SVN and other ones out there. But Git is usually the go-to, and usually GitHub is also pretty popular. You have all of your actual different flavors of Markdown. I've listed a couple here, but there's different syntaxes of Markdown basically that you can use to author your content. From there, it basically goes into a continuous integration and continuous deployment process where the content that you've created is built into a final published website as HTML. And you can actually view that usually in a preview of some sort. So you can actually see what the actual final content is going to look like. You can send out a preview link to your team, and your team can take a look at it before you actually merge in whatever the content changes are. So this is very similar to how code is developed. You do what's called a pull request, usually on GitHub. You review the code, you make sure it looks good, you have your peers take a look at it, and then you merge it in, and that becomes part of a permanent record of the changes that happened. So again, following a very similar tooling and tool chain to what developers are already doing so that everything kind of is living together. And then lastly, you have some sort of tool to host this final documentation. That one of the tools we'll mention is Docusaurus. That's the one I'm going to be demoing. But there's also others out there that there's a whole slew of different tools you can choose. A lot of them have to do with your preference of technologies and how they actually end up getting hosted. And we'll talk a little bit about potentially advocating for this in your company and other things like that, and why you might want to use particular tools. But there's a couple of commercial tools out there on the market as well. And also feel free to interrupt me if anybody wants to ask any questions about any of this.
We're gonna do that at the end.
At the end? Well, if you want to yell at me, go for it, it's fine. So again, this is really driven again by the idea that you want to keep development and documentation closer together and keep them in similar tool chains and similar approaches. Not always the best way to do it, but it is very valuable depending on the type of documentation you're doing, the type of team you have. And you can get a lot of synergy when you follow similar processes and you basically make documentation a core piece of the development cycle, such that, for instance, they have to do documentation as part of checking in their code. You can do things like that through the tool chains and make it a lot easier. So another thing is that a key word here that I'd like to use is the word lightweight markup language. So as opposed to something like Data, Markdown is definitely a lot more simple. It is very intuitive for people to learn, which I think reduces the barrier to entry, for instance, for developers to contribute to the documentation, or to at least provide it in such a way that technical writers can take it and make it more actionable, make it a lot better, and turn it into something better. So I think that helps a lot. that it's a lightweight approach. Another thing is that static site generators have become pretty popular. You guys may have heard of Gatsby. A company named Netlify has been pretty big. There's a word that gets thrown around called the Jamstack. It's a pretty popular approach to building static websites that are more either marketing driven or documentation driven, as opposed to, let's say, something like gmail.com, which is a web application that's very dynamic. Static site generators have become pretty popular in general. So this kind of has developed to popularity through the popularity of building bigger websites out of static site generators. And again, like I mentioned, developer-centric documentation, such as API documentation, is a really good fit for this. It's not the only thing that you would want to do, but it is a very strong fit to have developer-focused documentation. So if you have a product where the core buyer of that product is developers, this approach is very good for that. It's also very good for open source projects, or if you just in general have an active community, you can solicit improvements to your docs through that. So for instance, there's a company called Ripple that does a cryptocurrency, and they have a lot of open source tools. They do all their documentation open source on Git, and they actually have people come in and contribute to those docs all the time, make edits, improve things, say, hey, this isn't clear, it should be written like this for whatever reason. People make mistakes, and so that is another strong use case for this type of thing. So what kind of skills do you need to kind of approach this? Understanding, it's a little more technical, let's put it that way, in terms of like the actual tool set. You need to be familiar with Git. Generally, you'll probably need to be familiar with GitHub. You'll need to learn Markdown. Another popular format is called ASCII doc. And again, understanding kind of what is a static site generator, how does it work, how do I actually, like, what's the build process, how does it actually get produced? And so sometimes it can be a little bit more developer-y, which is why I said it fits really well with developers, obviously. But it comes with a little bit of a learning curve, right? It's not like, it's just all of a sudden you're gonna tomorrow pick it up. You're gonna need to have some patience to kind of learn these different things. So pros and cons, again, it comes back to, it relies a lot on open source software. Usually there are some commercial offerings out there, but basically you wanna have, it can be really cost effective in terms of like relying on open source software. You don't have to pay these huge license fees for all these different, commercial pieces of software that exist in the world today. There's a lot of opportunity for automation. Getting to that point requires obviously a dev team to be knowledgeable of how to integrate it properly. But you can get a lot of automation. A lot of developers will understand what I mean by saying when you do things in this way, you can really gain a lot of potential improvements in the build pipeline. But you'll have to take my word for it. It is a pro in general. I'm not going to dig into it too much right now. Maybe we can talk about it later. And then basically, again, it's a way to, as I mentioned, community collaboration, all that stuff. I think I spent enough time on the pros. Let's talk about some of the cons, because you're probably wondering, okay, sounds like he's pitching me something right now. So like, what's the problem with this? It can be, depending on the type of docs, it may not be the right fit in a lot of ways. So it's not, a magic tool that's going to solve all your problems. You should just immediately go tomorrow and throw away everything you've ever done and start doing it this way. Like you need to evaluate the tools and the approach with your team and make sure that it makes sense. There's some limitations in terms of information architecture. You're going to be a lot more on your own than you would be with other approaches, where you need to be basically responsible for more of the approach overall and keeping the quality and making sure that everything is coherent. It's a little bit more on your hands in that particular case. As I mentioned, the learning curve can be a bit steep, especially if you've never worked with Git. If you're not used to the complexities of like when things fail and stuff doesn't build properly, you could be relying on other teams, and that could be a bit of a slowdown, and that learning curve can be a deterrent a lot of times, but it's still very popular. And that's another reason to do it, is that the popularity of it is popular for a reason, because there are a lot of benefits. As I mentioned, relying on a technical team to host it and maintain it for you. There's a couple of commercial solutions. One of them is Redocly that can make this a little bit easier. But nonetheless, if you do endeavor to take this on your own, maybe you've got security requirements where you guys have to host your own version of everything, you're gonna need to rely on another team to manage that infrastructure for you, your DevOps team and different things like that. So there can be some downsides to this approach. As I continued, here, you're gonna do a lot of writing, not in a what you see is what you get editor. You're gonna do a lot of writing in a text editor of some sort, usually something like Visual Studio Code. That comes with a shift if you're not used to doing it that way. If you're used to authoring in a more visual way and you're moving into more of a textual way, it can be a big mental shift for people. So you need to be willing and kind of open to learning this approach and this way of doing things. And I think that can, if you're someone who likes to do that, who likes to dig into new technologies, who likes to understand new technologies, I think it can be a plus, but it is a challenge to kind of change that mindset if you're not used to it. So because of that, you should expect trial and error. You should expect things to break. You should expect to get errors that make no sense. And you're like, what the hell? What is going on here? Anybody who has to learn Git for the first time, I don't know anyone who started off as an expert. And nowadays I run commands that look ridiculous and I'm surprised I know what it means. So it can definitely be, it can be a trial and error. Like I said, code reviews is not necessarily something that people are used to. The way code reviews work on GitHub can be a bit weird if you've never done it before. Once you get used to it, like anything, it's just like riding a bike, you're good to go. But like I said, build failures. If you do have a lot of automation, you could have a lot of things where you get these random errors thrown out like that. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. Stop doing that. That doesn't make any sense. And that can all be a deterrent to really getting going with this approach to doing things. So without my notes on this slide, I don't remember what I was going to say here, to be honest with you. So what's that?
Bring them up.
I'll bring them up. Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
There we go.
Internal workings of your
Alright.
brain.
Let's see here what we got. Yeah, so basically, I was talking, I was back to what I was talking about, structured documentation. Like if you're looking for something that's like very, very technical writer centric, in the sense of like everything you ever wanted to do with content reuse and structuring and making sure that everything is like really, really how you want it, you're going to be a little bit frustrated, I think, because this approach is not really geared directly at technical writers as much as it's geared at the collaboration between writers and devs. And so that's basically, if you're gonna feel like, how come half my tool set is missing or even more? You're gonna be like, where's this? Where's that? I thought I could do that. Now I can't do it anymore. Or I got to go get a plugin now to do that. Or I need to talk to my tech team to add that to our solution. And so that can be, depending on the type of docs you're writing, that can be a real issue. Like as an example, I know that we worked with Google before, and a lot of if you've used Google's Help Center, most people have, you can see that they have just an absolute ton of content, but like a ton of reuse across different pages, across different product lines, all kinds of stuff like that. It's very complicated. They actually have their own home-rolled content management system that they built specifically for docs, and they maintain that, and they have a whole team that maintains that. And it has every bell and whistle that they need for their particular solution. This Docs as Code approach could get to that point if you had a team that was focused on building that for you. So this is a little bit more of a hands, like you really have to craft what you want versus getting an approach more in Ditto where it's a little bit more, there's a standard, there's a way to go about doing things, there's an approach, right? And so that's basically, you might want to just continue using like help authoring tools, stuff like that, if you're looking for more of that like control from a technical writing perspective is basically the point. So it gets a lot more nuanced than that. I don't have enough time to go into all of it, nor am I necessarily the most expert person when it comes to that. So I will be honest and say that I'm not. So we'll get into the demo instead. Okay, so I'll start off a little too far here. So I'll start off with the tool. It's called DocuSource. This is just one of many static site generators that's focused on documentation. And the documentation website for actually the entire website for DocuSource is built on DocuSource. So that's kind of an interesting way to demo the product to see kind of how it works by reading its own documentation on its own website. So all of these little tabs up here, everything about this website, the whole thing, the search bar, all of that is DocuSource. That is what the tool is. It builds this whole website for you. Now, on the back end, what that looks like for technical writers and for developers and how they actually write the content that shows up on these sidebars and different things like that, that's the part that I'm going to demo for you here in a second. But just real quick before I dig into the details on that, you can do things like here, like, I have a quick little search bar. I didn't have to do a whole lot for that. I basically signed up for this tool called Algolia, and I have a search bar, and it indexes all my content, and you don't really have to do a whole lot. It's very instant. It's very nice. It's got a very nice look and feel. You'll notice that, especially if you're a developer, you're probably very familiar with this kind of documentation. There's a lot of developer-oriented open source documentation that uses DocuSource. It's got a lot of stars on GitHub. It's a very popular tool, and you may have seen this kind of interface before. The nice thing is that most of what DocuSource does is out of the box, and anything it doesn't do, as I mentioned, there's plugins, and that's where you kind of have to bring your own approach to it and kind of tailor it for what you want. It has different things like, if you care about it, I do. Travis disagrees with me over there, my colleague. He loves light mode. I think he's crazy. I only operate in dark mode all day. I get blinded if I open something on my phone at night and it's in light mode, it kills me. But it has it out of the box. Languages, it has that types of features. You can see the different versions. You can archive different versions of the documentation, read it in different versions, all kinds of stuff like that. You can build different actual pages. So this whole actual page here is built inside of DocuSource based off of React, which if you've been around in the last 10 years, you probably have heard the word React and been around developers at all, because it's incredibly popular as a way to build websites. And so it is built on top of React. And you can see here they have 255 sites that are built on DocuSource. And there's a lot of big names in here. We've got lots of Apache, different stuff on here. Algolia is a pretty popular company. There's a lot of everything. The React Native website. You can scroll through this later, but you can see tons of examples, as you can see from the screenshots. The customization options to actually build these different websites get pretty, the sky's the limit. You can pretty much make anything you want with it. You can make totally complicated looking crazy websites. You can win awards all day if you want. You can do lots of stuff, or you can just have a basic, nice looking docs website that has, these little sections, little animations. It's a great out of the box experience to kind of look at this. So we'll dig into what that looks like. We have our little demo website here that we put together using DocuSource. And you can see from here that it's a little similar. We have a landing page basically. Here you can see that little slider to turn on light mode and dark mode. That's all built in. I didn't have to do much for that. And then basically this other content here, which is what we're going to show in a second, is dynamic. So when we click around, you can see in these different sections, it looks very similar to the site I just showed you, except it's all of our, placeholder content that kind of shows stuff. You've got things like call outs, you've got code blocks. When you mouse over the code block, it has a copy button. You've seen these features in other tools if you've done documentation at all. So it shouldn't be new in terms of the actual features, but what's nice about it, again, is all the things we already mentioned. So we'll dig in and we'll actually, we'll do some changes to this website, and we'll kind of see what it looks like to be working in more of a developer workflow. So one thing that developers are used to in their workflows is this concept of what's called hot reloading. So right now I have my terminal window open here, and I have run a command to start this project. It's called, we're using a tool called Yarn, which is based off of Node.js. And it's a package manager that lets you kind of run some scripts and build this whole website. This is built on top of Node.js. Not super important to understand that if you're not familiar with Node.js. But the point is, basically, I've opened my command line and I've hit Yarn start, and DocuSource started it up. It now is running at localhost 3000, and it's now going to output messages here as I do things. It says, okay, it's been compiled successfully, and we're all good to go. I got green check marks everywhere, and now we have this running website that works over here. So on the back end, this is a tool called Visual Studio Code. Did everybody see this okay? From size wise, like on the virtual?
Yep.
All good? Okay. So Visual Studio Code has kind of become an incredibly popular integrated development environment / text editor, very fancy text editor over time. And it's really, really popular among developers. Another one that's really popular is IntelliJ. They're from, I forgot the name of the company. Is that the name of the company? Anyways, the point is basically Docs as code can be done in whatever you want. You can open up Notepad and do it. Doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, we have this folder here that has a bunch of subfolders. And if you're noticing from the website that I just showed you, we come up here and we look at these different links up here. So if you look at that, I don't know if you guys can see that link, but if you see how it says Docs System Integration, and then over here we have this Docs Analytics, and then if I click over here, we have Docs Social, etc. Right? We have these different links. If you notice in here, these folders, they go one-to-one with those. So the way that DocuSource is configured out of the box is you basically can configure a subsection of the website to be kind of a docs collection. And then basically everything from there kind of flows pretty easily. So if we pop open this analytics one as an example, and we take a look at the actual overview.markdown, this is what Markdown looks like. For those that aren't familiar with Markdown, we have this thing right here between these dotted lines called front matter. And front matter is basically little attributes that explain about this file or about this page is what it'll end up being. But it basically stuff like you can give it whatever you want. You could come up with whatever you wanted. Like you wanted to have something called my special property, you know, and it's equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't really matter. In DocuSource, they've already defined in their docs, if you read it, they have a bunch of predefined ones that do stuff depending on what they say. So in this particular case, we have this label called overview. And you'll notice right here that when I come to Docs Analytics / overview, I have on the left sidebar a word called overview. And so because of that, if I say, you know, overview new and I hit save, then what'll end up happening is this will rebuild. You'll notice it didn't reload the website at all, but it now says overview new over here. And it didn't reload the website or anything like that. This is a feature that once you get used to it, it's really hard not to have it anymore. As a developer in particular, when you work on websites and anything in the web browser, if you don't have hot reload, where it reloads the content without changing the whole page, you don't have to wait. You hit save within usually a half a second or even faster sometimes. It's there and available. It's kind of almost like what you see is what you get editor, but not, right? Like it's like the next closest thing that gives you these benefits of doing things in a docs as code approach, but you still kind of maintain some of this like instant feedback, because when you're working on things, you want to know what it looks like. You don't want to wait, an hour. You don't want to wait even 10 minutes or 5 minutes or for something to rebuild and all that stuff. You want to be able to see what it looks like right now. So when you're doing the website, you know what your users are going to see at the end of the day, right then and there. And when you push this up to your GitHub, and it builds and it's ready to go, and your coworkers take a look at it, they're going to see the exact same thing, and your users are going to see the exact same thing. So you have this replicated environment on your local machine that looks the exact same as how it's going to look in production. And that can be a very powerful tool, and it can also give you a lot of ideas from a creative standpoint when it comes to being able to make the docs really pop and making sure that they make a lot of sense, because you're a user right there and you can move along. Not that other systems can't do that, but it is a very important feature that devs use all the time. And when you get in that kind of workflow, it comes with a lot of benefits from a mental standpoint, from an enjoyment of your work standpoint in particular. And you can see the same thing right here, right? If I add a bunch of stuff to the bottom, I hit save, before I could even tab back to my browser, it's already there. And that's actually rebuilt. That's a whole, like an HTML page. It's like that's already been pushed in. And that's one of the benefits of React and the way that it works. So that's kind of explaining, how this actual single markdown file works. But as I mentioned, DocuSource in particular comes with this nice approach where it's kind of a folder-based approach. And you can modify this. Anything you see can be customized, but this is sort of how it works out of the box. So you end up, again here with you have this service one. So if we pop into this product one, you can see we have these different links on the side. Again, it gets nested and you can keep nesting down. So you've got overview, how it works, getting started. Overview, how it works, getting started. If you come over here, you have integrate, analyze, contribute. You come over here, you have analyze, contribute, integrate, right? There's a one-to-one basically. And essentially you have these small configuration files that let you modify the way it works. This is all in the Docusaurus documentation. But essentially, if we come back under here as an example, this is a one that's kind of a fancy one. And we'll talk about under analyze, and we'll talk about markdown features. So if you look at this page, you can kind of see there's a lot of interesting blocks going on. We've got the code copy block, right? Where you show a piece of code, you can copy it directly to your clipboard. You've got different types of inline images. How do you do images? How do you do code blocks? How do you do these little call outs here where you can say, you know, hey, remember this, hey, remember that. These can all be customized. And then finally, you can do MDX components. So these right here are actually, these little green and blues are actually React components. So your dev team, or even you, if you like to tinker as a writer, can create these small little React components and run them directly inside of your code base. So even if you wanted to, if you like to tinker, you like to get into this realm, you can have very quick little examples. You can drop it in and you can create your own custom component that you can build off of. There's also tons and tons of React components on the web that you can kind of drop in, pull in, and really build whatever you want. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and it opens you up to an ecosystem of pre-built React components that they're just endless. There's so many of them out there that you can get. And so it's a pretty strong, powerful feature that, again, it goes back to the idea of extensibility of the platform. And so when we look in here, you can see that this is all marked down, right? So we've got bolded links. That's what this is. This is a link that's been bolded. You've got a code block here. That's what this is right here with the little 3 backticks. This whole thing is a code block. It has the code highlighting. It has all sorts of copy and stuff like that. But basically, you can see if you keep looking, it's a bunch of that kind of stuff. And then at the bottom, you basically have this React component that is actually built in line right here. So if I were to copy paste this in from the web, say I went out and I looked on a website and somebody had a little snippet that said, here's how you create a highlight. I could just copy paste it right into my markdown file here and then use it by saying, here's this little highlight and what's the color? The color is whatever. Without even understanding necessarily how this works, it would be very trivial to just drop that in, and then you end up with this right here. And so it's a very powerful way, like I said, to extend your docs and really make them customized to whatever you want without being in the limitations of a lot of off-the-shelf tools and the way that they work. You don't necessarily have to do it so much the way that they tell you to do it. You can kind of do it the way you want to and really expand from there. So this is at a high level, essentially what the Docs as code process looks like in terms of the authoring flow. So you would basically open these markdown files, you learn kind of how markdown works, you author it, you follow similar to this particular layout of how content is managed, and you basically end up with a nice little website. I could dig into a lot of these other files and different things and how they work. I don't know that that's necessarily super valuable, except to say that all of this is, as you would hope to expect, is very well documented by Facebook. So Facebook made Docusaurus. Again, this isn't a pitch for Docusaurus necessarily, but a lot of the Docs as code tools that exist out there, which are basically static site generators, they're very well documented, but as you would hope they would be. So you can come in here and customize your site very easily. Like if I want to change the title, I want to change the tagline for the description, I want to change, the fav icon, I want to change the way that the docs are organized on the left and right side. It's not too crazy to understand and follow along with their docs. It says, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. But again, it depends on your appetite for customization. If you are somebody who likes to tinker, you like to play around with it, do that. Otherwise, rely on your tech team to do it for you. And you focus on the writing aspect, which is focusing here and really
churning out the content. So I think that's most of explaining that part of it. So the next part I'll explain is basically the continuous integration part. So we're gonna come over to GitHub here. Hopefully GitHub doesn't get mad at me for being on a different Wi-Fi. All right, we're good. Okay, so this is the same set of files here that you saw in my Visual Studio Code. It's all the same files. If you haven't seen GitHub before, it's just a place to host your files, particularly for code projects. And then here's that README I mentioned. So the first thing you always see when you come to a GitHub repo is usually the readme.md in the root of the folder. So if we pop open that, even that is in Markdown. You can see I have a single hashtag here for an H1, basically a heading, and then a little subheading. And you get like nice little things like I can link to that subheading, different things like that. Like that's all kind of out of the box. There's a lot of this out of the box behavior you get when you follow this pattern. But basically, here's all this information. This talks about our config's a little more crazy because we've added a lot of stuff to it to make it more customizable. So this README is a little bit long. It could do from some refactoring. We just haven't gotten to it, so please don't judge too hard. It's a little long and wordy, but it was kind of the kitchen sink of information to dump in there. But nonetheless, point is let's make a change and see what happens. So we have this actual website is running here, and this uses GitHub Pages to actually host it. So GitHub, you may not know, GitHub has a free service. Well, it's not completely free. It's free if you don't have a lot of people coming to your website. It's a mostly free service called GitHub Pages, which allows you to host static websites pretty easily. So if you just have a bunch of indexed in HTML files and CSS and JavaScript, you can set up a little domain name right through their interface, and you can host your website there. So this is the same website that I was showing locally. You can see that it's the exact same, but it's hosted on GitHub Pages. And what ends up happening, so DocuSource comes with this out of the box, but what we end up happening is this workflow file here. You don't need to know the details of all of this. I'm just calling out that this is that continuous integration and deployment that I mentioned. GitHub has features for that out of the box, and so does DocuSource. And so what this can do is it can, as soon as you push a change to your GitHub, you can actually rebuild the site, redeploy it, and it'll be live. I'm not going to necessarily go through pull requests right now. That's a little bit too long to explain all that. But we'll do a very simple change really quick, and we'll see how it looks. And in fact, I think I already did a change. Did I not? I did. So we got a couple changes. You can see down in green here, I added that, and in blue here, I modified this line. So if we come down into our terminal here, you can do this with a GUI tool for doing Git. I don't ever use the GUI tool, so I apologize if this is ugly, but it is what it is. We're going to do it on the command line, so we're going to be special. Can you guys see that okay? Okay. So right now, if I type in this command called git status, you can see I have one red file. It says that it's been modified, which is that overview MD that we modified earlier when we changed to say overview new, and we added a bunch of ASDFs over here. If I want to do what's called a git diff, this can all be, again, done in a GUI tool. It'll show right there. You can see it deleted that and added. So it said, get rid of the old line, add the new line. And then down at the bottom, it says, add on these new lines. And so this is basically me checking really quick. Did I make the right change? Did I mean to make those changes before I actually send it up to the repos here? So then I'll do a little what's called git add dot. That does what's called staging. So that gets these files ready to be pushed up to GitHub. I'll do what's called a git commit, which is giving it a message. Again, don't be alarmed that it's all command line. You can do this with a GUI. I do a little message called docs demo, and we'll do a commit. So now we have a commit, and then I'll do what's called a git push to push that up, assuming that I don't get blocked. And I did not, so that's great. So it's been successfully pushed up to GitHub. You can see there's that GitHub, DevDocs or DevDocs. If we come over here and we look on me, you can see now there's this little amber light that indicates that it's being built right now by GitHub. And you can also see that now my change has been up there. So now I have a history of all the changes that have been done. By who, when were they done, what were the changes? I can click over here and look at my change and see it in a little nicer format than we did on the command line of the before and the after. What did I delete? What did I add? And you can kind of come in here. Normally you would do this through a pull request, but as I mentioned, we're going to skip that for now for the sake of time. But basically, if we pop into GitHub, you can see it's now building. And this is what are called GitHub Actions. That's their continuous integration and deployment pipeline. If we pop into here, you can see it's going through and it's actually building everything. So it's coming through and compiling all of those files, markdown files, styling them, turning them into actual HTML files so that they can actually be pushed to GitHub pages, and the GitHub pages can display the final build documentation. So when that's done, we'll basically be able to come over here and take a look at our new changes to the sidebar here. So we'll leave that open for now while it's going. But this part of it is a little bit more, again, probably want to have your tech team take a look, have your dev team help you out with this. But if you're so inclined, it's not too crazy, but it is, getting into the devy realm when it comes to this type of stuff. But again, the idea is that if you look at any sort of open source project, like if we were to go to GitHub and look at React and look at the actual React library on GitHub, one nice thing is you can tell this doesn't feel a heck of a lot different than ours felt, right? If I come to React, which has 189,000 likes essentially, which is an absurd amount, and 40,000 forks, which means 40,000 people or 39,000 people decided they wanted to work on this code. It's an absurd amount. 15,000 commits. It's a mind blowing. They've got 693 issues and 262 open pull requests, which is just they have a full-time team, people who get paid to manage this. But if you look at it, other than their astounding numbers, it's not really much different looking than ours. And that continuity of tooling is really huge, especially if you're trying to get developers to do anything. It's really nice to be able to, as a developer, do it right in that workflow. I can add in a markdown file, commit it in, and it goes straight to my tech docs team, and then they can take it and they can run with it and they can make it better and they can put it right back in the same place. Now we're all looking at the same source of truth. We're all in the same workflow. And that kind of ability is really, really powerful in my mind. And we've seen that work really, really well. So let's see if this is done. It is. So we got a nice little green check mark here. If we want to, we can pop into the details and see all of what DocuSource was doing, all the command line stuff that it's running, the builds, different things like that. We can see it build the GitHub. We can see it do what's called search indexing. So this actually takes all the pages and actually puts them into Algolia so that you can have all the search results show up essentially. So that all stuff is right there. You can see that. We come back over to the main website, hit reload, and there we go. We have all of our changes on the live website now. So we went from local, modified the code, the markdown files, commit it, push it up, merge it in, and now it's live and ready to go. So in a nutshell, that's the basics of kind of the workflow, how Docs code works, what it looks like, how the tools operate, and kind of a very popular tool when it comes to DocuSource. So again, just to recap, why would you want to do this? It's really, in my mind, it's really about collaboration. It's about having a workflow that encourages writers and devs to be in the same place, to do the same things, to be having more quality control put around that, and not have so much separation where you're in one system over here for the writers and another system over here for the devs. It can cause a lot of trouble. Hopefully you don't have that too bad at your company, but I've seen it not work very well. And I think when you have a more simple language like Markdown, as I mentioned before, looks like my nighttime thing's coming on.
I'm glad everybody sees that.
Yeah, that's like super, it looks like your eyes are like messing up. All right, let's turn that off. When you have everybody together and you encourage people to adopt a more simple approach to content and documentation, I think that what we've seen is you get a lot more collaboration, you get earlier conversations about things, so you're not having to do rework. And you can build into a development workflow where you actually can literally force developers to give the information that is required to document features as part of having to check in their code. And I think that's a very powerful way to do things, because a lot of times documentation is an afterthought for people. And it's a lot harder to write the documentation when you haven't looked at the code or the feature in a while. Again, some companies are really great and they do it ahead of time. One company that is very big on Docs as code is Stripe. I know people love Stripe. I hear it all the time, how much they love their docs. They use a flavor of Markdown and a Docs as code tool chain to build their entire system. Now they have a team dedicated to building that tool set as well, like I mentioned about Google. But the point is that they've had a lot of success in building a complicated documentation set. Again, Stripe is also geared towards developers as a product. So it makes sense that they would use that workflow, and they've had huge success with it. So I think that's probably a good spot to end and maybe transition to, I guess, is it questions, or did you want to cover, just
Yeah, we can.
leave the floor open for questions in general?
I am curious, like, where would you suggest someone start if they wanna start tinkering with a static site generator, Docusaurus or Docly, whatever, if they have some basic kind of Git Markdown skills and you're accustomed to using, you know, that sort of like general flow with their
Yeah.
teams, where would you start?
The question, just in
Like
case.
as a personal project to learn how to like.
Yeah, personal project, where would you start if you wanted to get started? Again, it's going to go back to that learning curve. So it depends on how good you are with command line tools, Git, that kind of stuff. If you have that experience already, I would recommend Docusaurus as a starting place, because they make it incredibly simple to just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you've got something running and you're ready to go on your local machine.
Yeah.
Now, getting it deployed, I would recommend something like Redocly. If you want to actually deploy it and not have to on your personal time, you don't want to go do a bunch of stuff. Redocly handles what we had going over here with this builds and all of this. They handle a lot of that for you. And you can just hook up your GitHub repo directly to Redocly, and they will build your website and host it for you and all that. I would recommend that for if you actually want to show it to people. If you just want to get on your local machine and you want to play around and learn and teach yourself, even if you do want to do is like extra homework, you can do the deployment side of it. But at least for your local machine, it's dead simple in general, as long as you're comfortable opening up your terminal and following along. Like I say dead simple, and I don't mean to like disparage anybody, but I have absolutely seen that when I thought it was simple, people like literally they don't understand like how to open the terminal and like, you know, the passwords, like what I need to enter my password. I don't know what that means. It's broken. Like I've had that happen, right? So it's not a disparaging remark at all. I'm just saying it depends on your familiarity with command line, really, whether or not you're going to feel comfortable. So you may need to start with teaching yourself what is Git. Take a basic course on how to use the command line terminal in your respective operating system. Learn those basics of like, how do I open this up and say, how do I list the files in a folder? Like you might want to start there if you're not really comfortable with command line at all. I would start there.
Yeah, we've done a lot of those meetups where we go through the basics, and if there's need or desire for that, we can also, kind of redo that whole thing to give people a basis for learning some of that stuff.
Yeah, but if you've already got that baseline and you kind of understand, like I can install a package. If someone tells me to copy and paste this into my terminal, I can do that. And I feel comfortable doing that. And then you can follow this installation guide. You're golden. Their docs are fantastic. They have very, very detailed information. And it's pretty 1, 2, 3. It's very out of the box. So I would recommend starting with this just because of how good and simple it is. It's very straightforward. It gives you a great setup out of the box, and you can just start playing with it, hit save and see the changes and be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Oh, I want to change the title. How do I move this sidebar item over here? How do I do that? And you can start going through their guides. I mean, they've got different types of guides on how to make pages. You can make a blog. You can do all kinds of silly stuff. It gets progressively more complicated, but never to the point that it's, too crazy. It's not too crazy. It's, I would call it intermediate.
Yeah, I
at
haven't used
worst.
like Gitbook. Is that gonna be similar to kind of how these, I just know of the tool, I've never used it.
I don't actually, I've never used Gitbook, so I couldn't tell
Okay,
you.
like Git Pages, like GitHub Pages is probably. a good
Yeah,
one.
GitHub Pages is somewhat similar, like Jekyll is another static site generator. So Jekyll would be somewhat similar to this. But I think Jekyll is a little more targeted at more of a broad usage pattern. And DocuSource is really more targeted at doing a docs website. And then they're like, hey, by the way, you can make pages.
Yep.
Versus the other way around, where it's like, hey, you're supposed to make pages. By the way, you could do these 10 configurations and have a doc site. So I think that's really the difference is like, there's another one out there, ASCII Doc. I forgot the name of the tool that's really popular, the ASCII Doc, but ASCII Doc's a little bit more of your heavy hitter when it comes to structure around kind of like a markdown-esque approach, but it's very technical writer centric. So it's way more complicated. And that's where like, for my recommendation, like I said, it really depends on your product and how complicated you really need to get. But especially if you've got smaller teams, it makes a lot more sense to me to have everybody sharing in the burden of documenting a particular feature. And that way it's a lot more, spread the load and make it more collaborative and more accurate, better quality docs. And Markdown is just a nice format for that I've seen work really well.
Instead of like develop it and then throw it over the fence, hey,
Yeah,
Tech
go
writers.
document this.
yeah.
And it's
do
like,
this.
okay,
Yeah,
it's like, okay, well, how does it work? Why does it work that way? Then you get an explanation that doesn't make any sense. And you're like, okay, now tell me that in English, please. And then, yeah, it can be ridiculous. So it's funny because, I was saying that at the beginning, I said, technical writers are asked to do a lot of different things and adapt to different things. I look at this as kind of almost a two-way street. You're basically, forcing technical writers to come into the workflow of devs, but then you're forcing devs to be responsible for the content, at least the beginning of the content. And that I think is the main thing that I find valuable about this is that kind of interlocking and collaboration. It doesn't work in every project, doesn't work in every team. You need to evaluate the particular situation, but it has been proven to be successful at large companies and small companies. You can make anything successful if you got a great team, of course. So that's why you need to evaluate it for what it is. But I recommend at the very minimum that devs and technical writers learn about this approach to content because I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think it's going to disappear. I think it's only going to get more popular. And I don't think it hurts anybody to have another skill set in their tool belt that they can, rep and be able to go into a job interview or think about changing to another company. And they say, hey, you need to know this, this, and this. And you're like, hey, I already know that. That's something I've seen before, or I'm familiar with it, or I've played around with it, or I built my own DocuSource website. Here it is. Go take a look at it. Just being able to show that, I think that initiative and understanding that is a very valuable thing in the world where we continually are pushing more and more dev-oriented tooling everywhere. It's, dev processes, agile, different things like that have spread outside of software development, and they've now started to become part of all technology-oriented organizations in a lot of ways. So I think anytime you can strike that balance between what's good for the dev team and what's good for the other team, that's where I think this is a good fit.
You're meeting the dev team more than halfway
Way more.
with an approach like this. I mean, it's going to be hard to say no if you're coming with this.
Exactly. Like I know for me as a dev for so long, like it's encouraging because it gives you this feeling of like almost like a completionist mindset. You're like, hey, I need to make sure my build passes. I got to pass this test suite. I have to make sure my code syntax is correct. I have all these static analysis tools. The feature has to actually be done and the docs have to be done. And now that's another check mark on the dev checklist, literally required as part of checking in your code. That is in my mind, that's a very powerful way of doing things. Even if they have to write something that's even half-assed, it's better than writing nothing and like having to come, back. At least you have a backlog. Did I go into sleep mode? There we go, we're back. Yeah, at least you have a backlog that is required, so.
Yeah, that, I was gonna mention that when you're talking about collaboration being kind of the best part of all of this. But for me, it goes a step further, right? So it takes, writers into the definition of done, like their work is in the definition of done. And then even farther in saying, hey, tech writers are just as much a part of the team as devs.
Yes.
I've been on so many different styles of teams and authored in different ways. And I can work the best, most efficiently and quickest when I'm treated the same as everyone else on the team. And
Yes.
I think if anyone here is a writer, they know that is not always how things go about, even in a progressive environment at your company. So it puts you on even keel, and they start to be more curious about what you're doing and respect what you're doing a little bit more. And so it really amps things up.
Yeah, I do think there's some form of advocacy needed as well, though, where one thing you do want to be careful of is you want documentation people to stay documentation people. You're not looking for them to become developers.
Yeah.
And like, that's an important piece that you need to advocate for that as a part of this transition. Like you said, it's meeting them halfway. It's not now, oh, great, now people that do docs are supposed to be devs. It's like, no. That's not the trade here. That's like,
Well,
we're
I
not
think
supposed
we
to do that.
also lose the perspective that we need to document for the customer, for the user.
Exactly.
If we're also devs, then we're losing that audience, forward kind of perspective.
Yeah, it's a unicorn if you find a dev that can do great docs. Absolute unicorn.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
I don't claim to be a great
I've always
documentation.
heard that you can teach someone who's a good writer to be technical, but it's much harder to teach someone technical to be a good writer.
I completely agree with that, 100%. I can advocate for that in myself for sure. I'm an okay writer. I'm definitely not a good one. So.
We have a question from chat.
Sure.
Linda says, are you saying Markdown is better than ASCII doc?
No, not at all. So this is back
Start a
to,
fight.
Yeah.
Opinion.
hot take opinions. No, I'm not at all saying that. I'm saying, in my opinion, that, and this is totally my opinion, is that ASCII doc is more geared towards technical writers. And so my opinion is that if you have the resources at your company to support a docs tool chain, Markdown can be really beneficial. If you have a smaller company where you don't have so much content, you don't have tons of moving pieces, I think Markdown and this approach can be great. I think the more complex you make your technical writing tool chain, the more complex you make your authoring tool chain, the harder it's going to be for developers to contribute. Now, that doesn't mean they can't contribute. It's just, if you start talking about, I got to get this feature out, or I need to write the docs, what am I going to do? And the first thing that's going to go is the docs. And that's what I'm trying to avoid, right? Like, I think that you want to try to meet somewhere in between. And I think that, in my opinion, ASCII doc is just a little too heavy for you to have devs buy in. That doesn't mean there's no devs that buy in. Some devs love the complexity of anything. And they're like, oh yeah, let's make it super complex. That's great. Yeah, this sounds awesome. And if you get that person on your team, that's the right choice. Go with ASCII doc. I've seen companies that use ASCII doc successfully. There's a very large one named Playtica, and they make a lot of developer-oriented game tools. And they use ASCII doc, and they've had a lot of success with it. And their developers actually have developed content and actually gotten it done. Then again, they're an incredibly massive company and they have a lot of people. So it's just a complexity problem. It's not that ASCII doc is better or worse per se. This is back to, you need to decide what are the trade-offs for your team and your particular project. And whether you learn ASCII doc or Markdown, it doesn't really matter too much. You're going to be in a good shape, in my opinion, if you don't know how to use it yet. Just getting into that docs as code flow with whatever flavor it looks like is the important part, in my opinion. That it's just one of the things you need to have in your tool belt to understand and be able to evaluate a particular project or team and decide what is the best approach here. What should we be using? That's my opinion on it.
We have another question from chat.
We'll do the chat one real quick.
We'll do chat real quick, if you don't mind. Can writers and SME collaborate on a GitHub-based document simultaneously, as in Word 365?
No, not necessarily.
Yes,
What?
Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, you can.
Oh, yeah. You could, but, yeah, okay, good point. Yeah, no, you can, but it's gonna be, to do that, you'd have to have DocuSource running on your local machine and on.
Yeah.
like, no, even with, no, with Visual Studio Code, okay, hold on a second. I did do this one. I think you can share the browser in Visual Studio Code and
Yeah, you
library.
can both see
Yep.
the,
Okay, so yeah.
It's like
no.
called live share or
No,
something.
you're right, you can, yeah, it's, in my opinion, it was a little janky, but you can do it, yes. you
It
can.
is a little janky to get connected, but once you
Once you're
are,
connected, it's cool, yeah.
Yeah.
You can follow people's cursors around and stuff, so that's kind of cool. It is a really cool feature. I would say the answer I would give to that is that it's not as easy and it's not as straightforward, but none of this is as easy and straightforward as using Office 365 or a Google Doc. Like, that's gonna be that simple way of doing.
well, but it might be a good
collaboration.
way to peer program, peer write, you know,
It is.
or like dev and writer together.
I don't know if I showed over here, but there's another interesting, there's tons of plugins. But I didn't show this, which is, what is it? Open preview to the side. You can do stuff like this. There's little plugins you could
Yep.
have to see side by side the actual rendered markdown. And it, like, it live-reloads, as you type and stuff like that. So there's different tools like that you can do that gives you a little bit more of an approach like that. So it just depends. There's an endless number of plugins and different things like that. But yeah, that is one way to do it. Good point.
If you have an existing body of work, like in Confluence or something.
Yeah.
Are there any sorts of like integrations that can help sync that, or how would you manage some docs being in DocuSource, like actually in the code repository, and some being in like a wiki?
Yeah, so let's see if this exists to answer your question. Using plugins, so there's nothing comes up as the first search. The answer is that DocuSource is extensible. It has plugins and you can make plugins. You need somebody that knows what they're doing, probably. I know Confluence, and somebody can correct me if they're more of a Confluence expert than I am. I know Confluence has export to Markdown at the very minimum, but live, like having a Git repository back your Confluence is not really what Confluence is like built to do. I wouldn't recommend it, like, in general, but you could probably figure it out. Like, Confluence is an API. Somebody probably has already tried to figure this out. I've heard people mention it before. With one client we were working with, they were like, hey, instead of using Redocly, could we, do it on Confluence? And the answer was, don't do that. Like, it was like,
You don't want to do
you don't want to do that. That was the answer. So it kind of is, yeah, it's kind of like not necessary and not really a good idea, but you can do anything you want if you want to spend the time on it. I haven't seen it done, let's put it that way.
There's another question.
We have a follow-up to the simultaneous question. Can tools be changed without a huge overhead?
I would say the answer to that question is it depends on how far you go down the customization route. So if you stick with the basics, particularly if you stick with the out of the box here. So if we go back to this file where it says sidebar label and sidebar position, that is a standard front matter for DocuSource. So if you wanted to convert that to, say, Jekyll or some other tool, it would be somewhat more straightforward because you could just, do a find and replace all. And here's all the files where it says sidebar position. And let's say in Jekyll, it was called something else. You could do that. Or somebody could write a little script that reads your whole directory and converts all your files over. That gets into a territory if you're going to need a dev if you don't have those skills. But if the idea of front matter is standard, and the idea of like this, how these headings are completely standard. So Markdown itself has multiple flavors of Markdown. So you can have, I don't know how many there are, but there's a couple. There's a GitHub flavored Markdown. There's another one in GitLab. There's a couple of major ones that are, a certain way. I'm sure people have written a couple of scripts here and there to convert between different major formats. So it really does depend how far you go down the rabbit hole. Like if you're coming up with, like, again, as I was mentioning before, custom property, and it's supposed to be an A, and it can only be an A or a B or a C for some reason, and you define that. If you're doing that all over the place and you've really made this tool chain your own, you're gonna have a hard time converting off of it and doing something else. So it really just depends.
I think there are some online conversion, get it, flavor Markdown conversions. You can just
There are.
plop it in and it'll spit it out.
It's very similar to the idea, like, can I export from Confluence? Yeah, you can. Is it gonna look right? Probably not. It'll get you part of the way. You know, you'll get somewhat there. I mean, we worked on a project where we converted from ASCII doc to Markdown. And that was a lot of work, just because it was a massive doc set. And they had a lot of stuff. And just usually if you're going to do a project like that, that's the opportunity you're going to take to rework the content at the same time. It's going to be more of a rewrite of the whole thing at the same time, and you're really not going to be doing a straight lift and convert at that point. It's just unlikely that you would want to. So yeah, you do want to be careful choosing your tool chain. And we've done comparisons like this before where I forgot what it was called. We've done comparisons like this before. ASCII Doctor, that was the name of it. So if you look at ASCII Doctor, I think it's one of them. You know, 4.1K stars, 5,000 commits, right? This kind of information when you're using open source tools, unfortunately, is pretty important. You know, they have 3 times the commits. They have, I don't even know how many that is. The math is absurd. 4,000 stars versus 189,000 stars, right? Like when you're choosing a tool chain, you want to evaluate how is it going to work for your team? How popular is it? Is it going to still be here in 5 years? Am I going to be able to get support? Am I going to find developers who can support that tool chain? Are my developers going to hate it and not want to work on it? And then they're going to be constantly like, I don't want to do that because I don't even want to touch that. It's a disaster. You know, like you're going to have lots of trade-offs. You need to decide on what you want to do.
Also, when the dates are in hours, that's a good sign.
Yeah, that's true.
Exactly. Yeah. Last commit 4 hours ago versus, oh, it's 16 hours ago. That's not bad. ASCII doc is pretty popular. Like it's active, you know, you can bet, I would choose it if it was the right fit. I would choose ASCII doc if it was the right fit for a project. I don't ever go into a situation and say, God, it has to be this. It's always, let's evaluate, let's figure out what fits the situation best. You always want to choose the right tool for the job. You never want to do a one size fits all, in my experience.
We have a third question from Amir.
Thank you, Amir. Must be working on a project.
Yeah. Can tags be added everywhere to the doc so that help can be hyperlinked to the doc on website? Any limits?
I think maybe he's.
I'm not sure what the question, I don't think I understand the
Yeah.
question. I can try to take a stab at it if you want to write another version.
I think it means that, so like you can put a tag in the doc and then if you have a website, you can have a link that pulls up the doc from the website.
Yeah, like context, like in, you know.
Kind of like context sensitive.
I don't think I still follow, I apologize.
I'll ask for clarification.
And maybe an example of what you're talking about would help me. The answer to most of those questions is always going to be that DocuSource is very extensible and most of these tools are.
Context sensitive links, help links to doc.
So is that like references to other pages and stuff like that that are automatically linked? Is that what
I
that
think it
means?
means if you're in a UI.
Yeah.
That you can have a link that will open
Like
the docs.
like sort of like in product awareness, pop-ups, things like that, like basically anything that will.
Like it stays in the.
Like
product.
I think typically they put the
Sort of.
code, I think typically they put the tags in the code.
Yep.
And then you give them the help URL. But the tags are actually in the code.
I believe so, yeah.
At least that's how some
But,
of.
like it would be inside of the product, like inside of the
Yes.
actual product,
Yeah.
Yes.
and like it would pull open
Yep.
like inside the product, like the URL.
Yep.
Yeah, so like that, you could definitely do that, because at the end of the day, it's just, you can see how like these have well understood link structures, stuff like that. And since it's in Markdown, you can pull it in really anywhere. Outside of that, this is more of a, I would think this is more of a question of infrastructure. Because if it, depending on how you want to deploy, like display it, do you want to render it inside of your app from the source? Or do you want to show like an iframe with the actual like pop-up of that particular page? Like you can do it whichever, this is more of a tech question, I think, than it is per se, like for instance, like that, right? Like if you wanted to show this as a pop-up in the iframe, that would be very simple because the URL structure is well understood. You could literally tag that URL structure and then that would pop up from that page right there. So there's a one-to-one, and that's more of a dev team question in terms of like how they define, how how they handle their
I
app.
think the simple answer is yes,
Yes.
Amir, this can be done.
Yeah, so like, there you go, like, that's a mobile view is what I'm saying. So like, if that was popping up in a browser window, it would look nice. It wouldn't be hard to do that. You could easily pop that up. You could also easily render this markdown file. There's tons of tools out there. Since this is built on top of React, you could render the actual content yourself in your app. Like say you had an app that couldn't use iframes and you wanted to render the source content, they could do that. They can pull that in. Is there other questions?
Oh, he was saying that he saw that headers are automatically given tags.
Oh,
Anchors,
yes, yes,
Yeah.
headings are automatically anchored, yep, and marked down.
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning about like over here, is that like this, so there's like, when you mouse over, there's that little link there. That's based off of GitHub's rendering engine that they have on their website. But yeah, DocuSource has a very similar behavior.
They're asking what happens if I want to add a tag elsewhere. You can
That,
add,
I was gonna say, that's when it's not as easy.
yeah, it's not like
But you can.
HTML where you can just anchor it to hell and back.
These, I'm not sure exactly, because like here you can link between files. Is that what you guys are asking?
Yeah,
I think he's saying like, if you want it linked to like, you don't want to link to the header, you want to link to
yeah,
like a
it's like
specific
somewhere
paragraph
within
or something.
the, following paragraph or something, like an anchor link in HTML.
Yeah, I think that depends on how you set it up, because
Yeah.
this actually supports HTML also. So you can set a named element and link to it that way, because you can have inline HTML. So that's a way to rely on the browser behavior if you want to.
Browsers also kind of allow you to just right click on any text now arbitrarily and just say link to this text. So it's
didn't even
less
know
and less
that.
kind of a thing you need,
I would
in
counter
my
with,
opinion.
why do you want to point to something that's
It doesn't have a heading?
in a second, huh?
Yeah.
That's my counter, Amir.
Yeah, I would think that you probably should have a heading more than likely, but yeah, if you wanted to and you had a use case, you could definitely do
Yeah.
it with an HTML inline, or modern browsers apparently thinks Brooks.
That's handy in the browser if you're pointing something out to someone.
Yeah.
That you're sharing
Especially if it's
with.
not
That's
something
true.
you own, yeah,
Yeah.
like someone else's article, like, oh,
I
this
can't
sentence is really
imagine
interesting.
use it for something that I own, but when I'm sharing from
Yeah.
something from a third
Mhm.
party.
That's someone they were saying they were using Markdown and their dev team is trying to move them to ASCII doc.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, they were the ones that asked about the markdown versus.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, that's just a personal preference, I think, and it's just what's right for the job. It's interesting that the dev team wants to move it to
Yeah,
it.
from markdown to ASCII, it seems like it would happen the other way.
I mean, again, it's
but-
all opinions as well.
Draft.
There's a heavy dose of opinions in any of this stuff, of course, so if they like it, I mean, you can author in anything you want,
Yeah.
It's all about what you like to do and how you want to do it.
Yep.
Okay, who wants to link to a table or a graphic? So
Yeah,
just-
that would be like an HTML anchor, you just have to.
I'm actually not sure. I wonder, actually, based off of DocuSource, I wonder if they actually have a way to do that or not. I'm not sure.
They might.
Hey, that's homework. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, can I link to this one right here? Doesn't look like it. Doesn't look like there's an easy way to do that. So yeah, I think you would just have to give that image a name, give it an
You
anchor
might be able to configure your project to,
automatically.
to
Yeah,
link from like
you
a
could.
certain markdown tag, right?
Yeah.
Like a code block, could be a trigger for, I don't know.
Yeah, well, you can, anything can be a plugin. So like this code highlighting blocks and all of that, these are all very simple to make in general. And so you could modify this and say all code blocks now have anchor tags.
Yep.
You could do that automatically without having to like specifically go through every single
Yeah.
individual one. So
You could spin up your own little React components in something like Figma, output it from Figma and
Yes.
drop it right in.
Yes, you
in
could.
there.
yes, you could, especially if your React components are simple
Mhm.
and they really aren't requiring like network requests and all kinds of crazy. You could do network requests and all that if you wanted to. You can do anything, but very simple React components. Yeah, you can make anything, and you can grab it off the shelf and drop it into your. There's so many UI libraries out there you could use. Just pull it in, really make it your own, whatever you want.
Justin, you don't need notes. Oh, question, go ahead.
How does the media image management work? It's is it really easy to use images Like, if I have one screenshot, I want to use it in multiple pages.
Okay.
Is that easy to sift through those? And also, how does it handle alt text? Can it do that?
Yeah, it does alt text because it has it, like, that's built into Markdown, the way that alt text works. You can do content, you're basically talking about content reuse. You can do content reuse in Markdown. I'm not actually like a huge expert at it, to be honest with you. So I don't have like off the top of my head, I can't say like, you need to do this. But you can basically, similar to how you can import a React component. So like down here, I had this React component that was inline. You could technically take this component and say instead, like if I wanted to real quick, if I said export const, my image as an example, and I said that was, some sort of image source equals blah, 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 alt tag is blah, 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 right? However complicated I wanted to make it. I could do a quick little HTML, and then I could reuse this image everywhere. Like I can import this into my Markdown files and I can use it everywhere, and I could do it that way. That's one way of doing content reuse, would be like that. You can do that also with like Markdown files. You can import, like, take this Markdown file and put it over here inside of this other Markdown file. So like you can do different stuff like that.
Oh, that's a good question.
So you can, that's, the answer is the content reuse takes some time. You're gonna have to like look into
There are
it more.
definitely some ways though that you can use like includes, like you can, it was just essentially like a snippet, content reuse snippet.
Exactly, yeah.
It's really anything that, lies within that repo of information, you can quickly plug in to anywhere using, it's not gonna be native to like Docusaurus, but you can use a plugin to do that.
But it'll save you time and headaches.
Yes.
Definitely.
And then
It's
you
worth
basically just
the
have a
investment.
repository of stuff that you want to reuse, and then you have a mechanism to do that. It's highly customizable.
I just don't have it on the top of my head. I apologize.
It looks like Docusaurus supports Markdown transclusion or NDX transclusion.
Thank you.
So that might be helpful.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff it supports. It supports all kinds of crazy stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry, just to like maybe clarify a little bit more.
Yeah.
So like, for example, we have this huge unorganized library of like 2,000 images.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, okay, instead of uploading a new image, let me see if I have it in the
Right.
library.
Yeah.
Does it kind of support something
Your
similar to
asset
that?
should live in the folder that your content lives in, right? So if you want to use an image in your overview section, you should have an assets folder in that section. It's small. So you have, you don't want like this one giant library folder of images.
This comes down to what I mentioned in the beginning, which was information architecture and organization.
Mhm.
This is a personal preference. That's one of the things about these tools, is that like it gives you some structure, but it doesn't give you too much structure. So in that case, you need to decide how you guys want to manage your images. So as she was mentioning, a really good way of doing it is keeping it very close to where the content lives, so that it's one-to-one, and like you're not
Right.
uploading it all over the place like that. You don't share it that's more of like a content management system type thing, where you just have this like a WordPress or something like that. You're just like,
This is what we use, so.
yeah,
that's why I'm
exactly. No, I know what you're
asking.
talking about. Yeah, it doesn't out of the box like handle that, but like as an example, in React, and particularly because you're using a whole system, one thing you can do is you can actually, during the build process, you can dedupe is what it's called, which basically means you have two images that are the exact same binary files. You can eliminate that and not have copies. You can actually end up with one file when the site is finished building and it goes through that whole process. It only has one file and it's shared between those two places. So that's more of an advanced thing though. You would have to configure that in the tool, but that is something that happens all the time. Like if you've ever heard of Gatsby.js, they do that with this thing called Gatsby image. And that's built into the framework where it basically handles these types of things where you're trying not to duplicate stuff. So it's more of it's a technical decision, I would say, and a content organization solution that you would have to decide on.
We have one final question, I think, on the chat. Can internal content be hidden from the general public? I asked because this is not possible in GitBook.
So that's where you're gonna start getting into more technical questions for dev team. Redocly supports that out of the box. But Redocly is a paid tool, and they're a commercial tool. So if you're gonna get serious about complicated setups, Redocly is a pretty good choice. It does come with its own set of limitations in terms of, you're in their system. But they are doing a very similar approach to Docusaurus. Like it's a very, very similar approach. It's just their own version of this. It's not open source. But they have all of that where you can hide certain sections. You can put the whole thing behind a login wall. You can have single sign-on. You can have all that kind of, those are all tech problems. Those aren't out of the box with Docusaurus. Docusaurus is more focused on a very specific problem, and it's outside the scope of Markdown in general. So what Redocly has is stuff like this, where we talked about that front matter. You could say role, and then have like a little array here where it's like, public or role admin, or, this is allowed to be seen by admins and, super admins or something like that, or whatever. And they have defined in their interpretation of the front matter, they have defined these different rules about how this stuff works. So this is a tool chain question. It's a bigger question. Docusaurus doesn't have it out of the box. There might be an integration that I don't know about where they've said, hey, you can add this and get it set up similar to the Algolia search. There might be some integrations with third parties, but it's not something that's inside the scope of like out of the box features. Usually more of a complicated subject. All right, anybody else?
Thank you so much, Justin.
I'll bring up this one. There you go. It's your turn.
I noticed you conducted most of the demo in light mode. Is that a Freudian slip?
I figured everybody could see it easier, I'll try and be nice.
It's a tribute to you.
Yeah, just because I respect you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Remote and especially here in the room. It's great to see everybody. And we'll schedule another one soon.
If you have any ideas for meetups or anything you want to see or learn, then hit us up in Slack. We have a Slack channel in the Greater Write the Docs, or in the meetup group on Write the Docs.
Right?
Yeah, thanks for putting it on, y'all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Night, everybody. I don't know where the camera is. Night, everyone.
I think it's over there, maybe.
It's
Over there? Oh, there it is over there. Okay.
over there too. I don't know.
I think that's the one that gets broadcast.
You're being
it's
watched
usually
from
this
all
one.
sides.
More.